When we ask what is Goth, the answer is rather complex. Over the century, the word has shifted its meaning, and there are several influences that have shaped it. We can trace it from the Roman Empire to modern club and pop culture, and there are also very modern takes. A definition of Gothic needs to take into account several aspects. Rather historical aspects that explore its meaning are, for example, etymology, the history of the meaning of the word and its connotations, literature, especially genre-defining literature deriving from 18th century Romanticism, the 19th century Victorian era, and the 20th century, including, of course, film. Also, there is art to look at, starting again from Romanticism, but also exploring German Expressionism, which has been very influential in filmmaking, especially in Tim Burton's movies. In addition to that, rather modern aspects that expand and characterize the Gothic are the importance of 1970s punk movement when it comes to developing fashion style and the music genre. And finally, there are social studies that have dealt with Goth as a youth culture, which also touch commonly found philosophical beliefs. The story begins around 150 AD with the Goths, a Germanic tribe during the migration period that spread throughout Europe. To the Romans, they were seen as outsiders and were called barbarians, primitive and uncivilized. To be fair, the Romans called every non-Roman a barbarian, but what made Goths special in the end is that they became associated with the downfall of the Roman Empire, and by that ending the classical antiquity, the time of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. The exact event usually referenced in this context is the sack of Rome by Germanic leader Alaric, which happened 410 AD. The word Goth then disappeared for 1,000 years and then reappeared in the Renaissance era and was used to describe a style of architecture that developed in France during the Middle Ages, the style until then known as Opus Frankiginum. After 1,000 years of Dark Ages, thinkers of the Renaissance turned to the classical antiquity and admired everything: philosophy, values, art, and architecture, which you can see here. They admired the harmonious, symmetrical, and simple classical style, which was contrasted by the more sophisticated and all different French style. In order to express the disapproval of it, they coined the term Gothic for it, associating it with the barbarous Germanic tribe, which was responsible for the downfall of their beloved powers of the classical antiquity, the Romans and the Greek. During the Renaissance, the word got loaded very negatively, and here are some other examples. It was described as monstrous and barbarous, disorder, an echo of the primitive huts the Germanic forest dwellers formed by bending trees together, and the besotted taste of Gothic monuments, these odious monsters of ignorant centuries which the torrents of Barbary spewed forth. The most important step for the word's modern meaning, and basically the romantic rebranding of it, came with the novel Castle of Otranto, subtitled A Gothic Story. Gothic here used as a reference to medieval atmosphere, to a mysterious castle, supernatural events, but not necessarily used negatively anymore. This novel is so full of what we nowadays call the Gothic tropes and elements that it created a whole new genre, which was called Gothic literature. So to sum this up in a quick overview and a timeline. We had the classical antiquity with the Germanic tribe, the Goths, which were described as uncivilized, unpleasant, and cruel. Then we have the 1,000 years where the term Gothic actually is irrelevant, but in which a new architectural style originated in France. We have religious art style, and this style of architecture was renamed in the Renaissance as Gothic again, in order to show the disapproval and in order to show or to reference to the uncivilized and barbarous Germanic tribe in the classical antiquity. Then there was the Age of Reason, an intellectual movement characterized by an emphasis on reason and science, and also the time of the Industrial Revolution. This Age of Reason was counteracted or was countered by a counter movement, the Romanticism. Emotions instead of machines and cold science, nature instead of dirty cities and factories, fantasy instead of reality. So basically the exact opposite of what the Age of Reason stood for. It was a movement dedicated to exploring and accepting human emotions, and the dark romanticists included darker emotions also, like a melancholy, mystery, gloom, and it was also the era where the concept of the sublime was explored. The Romantics were heavily inspired by the Middle Ages and created the Gothic genre in literature and art. Music and fashion then later started to use the term in the 1960s and 70s. And this concludes a quick overview about the etymology of the word, and thank you for watching.